Praise Lord. Greetings to you all in the precious name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Shall we pray and then look to the Lord? Let's ప్రార్థన చేసుకుని ప్రభు వైపుకు ఆయన మాటల కొరకై ధ్యాసపరుచుకున్నాం. Heavenly Father, we come to Thee. Indeed, Lord, Your word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. Where else can we go but unto Thee who have the words of eternal life? మా తండ్రి, మా జీవితానికి నీ వాక్యము నైనా మా ప్రభావ మా పాదముల దీపముగా మా త్రోవకు వెలుగుగా ఉంది. నిత్య జీవపు మాటలు కదా నీ అంతకు తత్వం ఎవరైతే వెళ్ళగలను. ప్రభావ నీ మాటలు వినటానికి వచ్చిన నీ ప్రజలను జ్ఞాపకం చేసుకోమని Thy people as those that You have bought with Your precious blood, as we have come, Lord, to hear Your voice, unworthy as I am, as I stand on Thy behalf. Ask of Thee, Lord, that You would hide me behind Thy cross, that You would speak to me, through me, to each one of us. Help us, Lord, to hear Your still small voice, that our lives would be ministered, our lives would be met by You, our lives would be molded by You, and fashioned in the likeness of this high calling You've given to walk in this world as Your people, called by Your name. Father, help us, Lord. Lord, minister to us. I give this time, ourselves, all of us, into Your hands. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen. Last week, as Praveen was announcing the sermon series, he mentioned one thing, saying, as we're going to do the sermon series in Malachi, please read some chapters and come. And I was praising God in my heart for that words, because I'm sure it is going to be a blessing if you have read the book of Malachi at least once, and or else if you have read at least chapter 1 today. Because I have a Herculean task to be able to do this particular book that is before us, the last book of the Bible, the Old Testament particularly, in 3 sermons where we have 4 chapters. There is some rich content in it, and it is impossible to be able to really touch and cover all the precious things that are there. But my desire is that we come and at least begin to unwrap the precious truths that the Lord has for us, and particularly our own lives, as we will look at why it is applicable for our lives, and for each one of us that is seated here, it is very, very much applicable to all our lives, as we will quickly look at it. So also I have this Herculean task of not only delivering all the 4 chapters content, at least the main points, but also I need to try balancing between English and Telugu for the sake of those that are to follow. So bear with me, and as I move fast, try to follow me, and if you can, at least in the next 2 Sundays that are going to be, try to read chapter 2, 3, and 4, which is what we will look at. Today, my desire is that we would look at Malachi chapter 1, as I would introduce this book and also give certain structure, and also the main theme, and then the things that are the purpose of writing this letter. Now, as you look at the title of this series, you see that it is called the Messenger series. We have looked at a number of books in the Bible by the grace of God through as a Sunday sermon series, and each particular book, particularly on the book-based series that we have done. I don't have time to review all that, but if you see that there is a resonating, the main theme of the book is what I would want to emphasize upon. Not that is all that is there. There are many things that are there, but the reason I've titled this as the Messenger series is particularly by the word Malachi. which stands for my messenger. That we pick it up in Malachi chapter 3 verse 1. It says, behold, I will send my messenger and he will prepare the way before me. And as the name Malachi stands for the messenger or my angel, it is vital for us to take note as to what the Lord communicates through this so-called messenger. And of course, that is also applicable for John the Baptist, who happened to be the forerunner for Jesus Christ himself. And we will try to understand as we are going to wrap this series, hopefully on the third Sunday, when we take a look at chapter 4, as to what are the things in John the Baptist's life that you and I can desire to become like, whereby we become the messengers of God. That is what I would try to conclude us. But certainly, our desire to become the messenger of God, to be an angel of God, in the sense that we would be able to take the message of God to the people of this world that we live with, that we are living around, that are living around us, is such a vital call for all people that are sitting in this sanctuary today. So that's why I would say first and foremost that as you look at this title, may you and I prepare our hearts in a prayerful mode to desire to become the kind of messenger, or a messenger with a message that is the very word of God. Our lives ought to be a message, and what we communicate also ought to be a message that is from the very word of God that we have. And so that is just a brief introduction about the title. Telugulo kuda kluptumga నా దూతను పంపుచున్నానని మలాకి 3:1 రాయబడి ఉంటున్న ఆ యొక్క సారాంశము ఈ యొక్క శీర్షిక యొక్క సర్మన్ సిరీస్ కి గల శీర్షికగా ఎన్నుకొనబడింది. ఎందుకనంటే మన జీవితాల్లో ఆయనకు ఒక దూతగా, ఆయన సువార్తను అందించువారుగా, ఆయన సత్యము ప్రకటించువారుగా మనము మరి బాప్తీసం ఇచ్చి యోహాను గురించిన ప్రవచనంగా ఆ భాగంలో ఉంటుండగా, మరి మన జీవితాల్లో అటువంటి మాదిరిని పోలి, ఆయన జీవితాన్ని పోలి ఎన్నో విషయాలు మన జీవితాలు ఆ యొక్క క్రమంలో ఉండవలసిన అవసరం ఉంటుండగా, ప్రార్థనాపూర్వకంగా దేవుని యొక్క వాక్యాన్ని వినటానికి మరి సిద్ధపడాలని మనవి చేస్తున్నాను. Let's walk through the few things that are very obvious and some may not be as we look at this book of Malachi. As we see, I think I switched it on. All right, I think this is working or not? No. Does it go back and forth? Is it hooked? Okay, that's okay then. We just have 4 slides, so I'll have you go to the next slide. As we see that this particular slide gives us the introduction. క్లుప్తంగా ఉపోద్ఘాతం మలాకి గురించి మనం ఈ భాగంలో చూస్తున్నాం. We just need to understand the background of the book. మరి ఈ యొక్క గ్రంథం రాయబడిన మరి వారి జీవిత వైఖరి, వారు ఏ రీతిగా ఉన్నప్పుడు దేవుని ప్రజలు ఈ గ్రంథము రాయబడి ఉంటుంది అని చెప్పి మనం గమనించినట్లయితే, మరి యూదయ జనాంగము బబులోను యొక్క బాంధవ్యం నుంచి విడిపింపబడి తిరిగి మరి యెరూషలేము అలాగే ఆ యూదా ప్రాంతానికి తిరిగి వచ్చి వేసిన ఆ దినాల్లో ఈ యొక్క గ్రంథం రాయబడి ఉంటుంది. This book had been written. The time of Malachi is around the time when Nehemiah and Ezra have brought back a number of people during the time of the Persian Empire, as they came back to the promised land and they were building reconstructing the temple and then the walls that were built around the Jerusalem city. It is during that time that this particular book was written. And around 432 BC is what we see the dating. Particularly as we look at chapter 1 verse 8, we see a mention of governor there. Offer it now unto thy governor, which helps us to see that this was the time when they had a governor, first to begin with Zerubbabel and then even Nehemiah in his second exile. We see that he takes charge at the affairs in Judea and Jerusalem. So it is during that time that God uses the prophet Malachi to give his prophetic utterance and speak to the people of God, particularly about their backslidingness. And so we see that's why in chapter 3 verse 1 that he had sent his messenger, and then we see that the purpose is to call back the backsliders. Chapter 3 verse 7 gives us that high level theme of the book of Malachi, where it says, even from the days of your fathers ye are gone away from mine ordinances and have not kept them. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, saith the Lord of hosts. But he said, wherein shall we return? This is where the central theme of this particular book is hinged upon. We see God is calling back his people unto himself. Yes, they have come back from the captivity of the Babylonian Empire to the promised land, but having come back, built up the temple, having the walls that are around being built up, they still have a number of things in their heart which we would look at in chapter 2, because of which they are far from God. And God is calling these people of God back unto himself. And that is the very theme of this particular book. And now I would say this very cautiously as well, and also very clearly too, that none of us would want to call ourselves as backsliders. All of us would always want to call ourselves as those that are doing good, are walking well with God. We are spiritual people. We are all very prayerful people. We read the Bible, we memorize it, we are always found in the church, we are partaking in church activities. But none of these are the things whereby whether we are backsliding or not is to be defined. We will see from the word of God as to what is backsliding, and then why is God calling God's people back onto himself. We will try to understand that. But take note that the purpose or the main theme of this particular book is God is sending his messenger to call God's people back onto himself. Now, there are a number of ways that this book can be structured, but for my study that I could glean precious truths, I could see seven key questions, and questions that were raised and objections clarified, and then God is charging God's people to take note, giving a solemn charge to take note of what he has to say about the questions backsliders would ask. And I'm sure when you look at these questions, these are questions that are asked by both the children of God or believers, and even those sometimes that have not even known God, but just as objections, plain objections to say, maybe I don't have to bother, I don't have to think about God, I don't have to come and submit myself or commit myself to God. And so these questions are one or either some or the other time you and I could have probably pondered upon in our own heart and in our own lives. So I have structured our 3-part sermon series in those 7 questions that we would look at. And I also have an assignment for you in the next 2 weeks. Maybe next Sunday we would look at all the 7 questions. But for today, the time that we have, as we look at the first chapter, we see the first 3 questions of the 7 that we would try to see how the questions were asked by the people of God, and how God takes up the prophet of God to raise those same questions and clarify objections, and also give a solemn charge after answering those questions. So let's quickly pick up at chapter 1, verse 1. And before we do that, let's go to the next slide, which give us certain other important things as to why we need to take note of this particular book. Yes, it is important that we need to understand these questions, which are very much part of our lives, whether we ask it orally or whether we ask it in our own heart. Second, It is before God has been silent for about 400 plus years. Just note, if somebody were to become silent or mute for some set of years, and particularly God, you'd want to take note of what is it God would want to say before He is silent for the next 400 plus years. And so, as the Old Testament wraps up, this book is vital for us to understand how it sets a stage for the things that are to come as the part of the New Testament or New Covenant. So, we see that there is a looking forward to of the New Covenant and the Messiah that is to come, which is also prophesied, which is why this book Malachi is rightly placed as the last book of the Old Testament. Quickly, another way of looking at it in a very high level is that it is structured in this threefold way. One, it talks about God's people's background, it talks about God's people's backslidings, and it also talks about God's promises to God's people. So these are very much applicable to our own lives. And now, when I talk about backsliding, quick note that I would want to give to us. By the way, some of it is in Telugu. I'm hoping all of us, those that are following Telugu, would be able to get that. దేవుని ప్రజల యొక్క నేపథ్యము వారి యొక్క బ్యాక్గ్రౌండ్, అలాగే వారి తిరుగుబాటుతనం, అలాగే వారికి ఇవ్వబడిన వాగ్దానాలను ఆయన ఈ యొక్క గ్రంథంలో ప్రస్తావిస్తున్నట్లుగా మనం చూసుకోగలం. Let's move to the word called backsliding. When we think about this word called backsliding, we always think that it is for those people who have stopped coming to the church. It is for those people who have stopped hearing the word or reading the Bible. But yes, it is very much applicable for those people, but it is also applicable for people such as those that are hearers of God's word but not doers of it. We read in James chapter 1 verses 22 to 25, do not be just hearers of God's word and deceive yourself, but be ye doers of the word of God. When I think about my own life and think about all that God has taught me, all that precious truths that God has been teaching day in and day out in my personal study, in the Bible study, and also in the church, when I think about all that He had been teaching me, I can certainly say I fall into the area of backsliding because I'm not yet there to be able to do all that God has already taught me. And so that is one reason why all of us would probably fit well into this particular category. Second, Paul says in Philippians 3:14 that I am not looking back at the things that have happened or that I have done, but I am looking forward to, not that I have already achieved it. I'm paraphrasing it. Philippians chapter 3 verse 14 onwards, we read, I press toward the mark of the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. And he says, verse 13, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth onto those things which are before. And in this we see one important thing. We always look back and see as to what we have done for the Lord, what ministry we have done, what all that we could give gospel to people and the ministering that we have done. And then we can always look back and then just relish in it, in looking back to the past rather than looking forward to the future and the high calling and the high prize that God has for us when we are received up and when we are before the Lord, that great accolade that we have to be focused upon. And so when we think about these two things, it certainly speaks about all of us included as to how we need to be those, counting ourselves as those that are work in progress, and then looking to the future and looking to the Lord rather than looking backwards or just counting ourselves as more spiritual. Now, having said this, quickly we'll go to the next slide, which gives us the questions. I suppose, Can you go to the next slide? Yes. So let's walk through chapter 1 and then pick up these 3 questions that we would see. And then for today, my desire is that we would touch upon the question, we would be able to complete the answer to some extent about question 1, and then also partly question 3, which is what is done in the chapter 1 that we have. So let me read chapter 1 verses 1 to 5. Let's read it responsibly. Malachi గ్రంథము మొదట 5 వచనాలు ఉత్తర ప్రత్యుత్తరంగా చదువుకుందాం. Let's read the first 5 verses responsibly. The burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, saith the Lord. Yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith the Lord? Yet I loved Jacob. And I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Whereas Edom saith, ye are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. Verse 5, and your eyes shall see, and ye shall say, the Lord will be magnified from the border of Israel. Now, may the Lord bless this reading. And here we see in chapter 1, verse 2, if you have taken note, it says, wherein hast thou loved us? Wherein hast thou loved us? These are the questions. If you follow the English Bible, you would see that these 7 questions that we trace through this book of Malachi were actually the questions that the people of God have asked, whether orally or in their hearts. And these are the questions where we see this tag, yet ye say, or yet you are saying this. And that is where we see God is actually evoking these questions that any time that people of God might have raised or thought about in their hearts, and He is clarifying the misconceptions and also answering, and then He is charging them. And that's what we see as we begin in the first verse, the burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. Malachi is the messenger who is bringing the oracle of God, or the very word of God, and he begins to say, I have loved you. God is giving them a clear setting wherein he has placed God's people. God's people have been placed and have been lavished by the love of God, which is what we see in verse 2. I have loved you, saith the Lord. If there is anything that is inherently foundational to our lives, it is the love of God that has been demonstrated to us on the cross of Calvary. And it is the love of God, particularly to the people of Israel, in the way that He has chosen them to be God's people, in the way that He has led them as a special nation under the sun. And it is that mark of God and His lavish love, which is how God's people are characterized. Now, here we see God has not only loved, but He also has articulated His love to us through the Word of God. On a number of occasions through His prophets, God has spoken about His love. He has loved us with an everlasting love. Jeremiah chapter 33 talks about it. I have loved you with an everlasting love. This is not a love just for some puny reasons or a particular period, but He has loved us with an unchanging, everlasting love that is from eternity to eternity. And it is in His love that He had put the people of God and has surrounded them with. And so this is the characteristic of God's people, that they have been brought to enjoy and also know the love of God. And these are the very people, sometimes they can get into situations, or they can have these questions, whether raised up orally or whether they're thought about inherently in their heart, wherein hast thou loved us? This is a question, maybe not always that we ask, but when times that are so distressful, when times that are not going according to as how we desire, when we lose our dear one, or when we lose something that is so significant in our lives, there can be these questions that might ponder in our hearts. Where are you, God? We see that in the Psalms time and again, David wrestling in his heart. And finally, in that time of prayer and wrestling, he comes and says, I will still trust in my God. And he says to his own inner being, saying, yet still I will trust my God. And in those vulnerable times that we ask these questions, where are you, my God? In the silence of God, we would say, do you really love me? And so on and so forth. There are these questions that would come up. And sometimes it need not be in the time of a great loss, but also in the monotonousness of materialistic lifestyle, you and I might completely be agnostic to the love of God and be so focused on the things that are material, and then just sometimes just think about this question, does God really love me? And then because of the monotonousness of our spiritual lives, we can get so dry and then think about this question, wherein hast thou loved us? That's a question that can come up. And that's why we read in Matthew 24, talking about the end times, Jesus saying in verse 13, he says, in the last days, iniquity shall grow, and because of which the love of many shall wax cold. అంత్య దినాల్లో అక్రమము విస్తరించును కనుక అనేకుల ప్రేమ చల్లారిపోవును అని చెప్పి ఆ భాగంలో చూస్తాం ఈ మాట. And as it is primarily the reason our love goes cold is because we forget to understand God's love, we forget to remember the love of God, and we become so dry in our well, in the innermost being of our lives, that we are not captivated by the love of God. By the way, the love of God is the fuel for our Christian life. We see that God, when He saves us, when He brings us into His salvation into His fold, He pours His love through the Spirit of God. Romans chapter 5 verse 5, we read that through the Spirit of God, God has poured forth the love of God in us. It is that love of God that becomes the fuel, the igniting fuel for our Christian life, that we walk in love to God because of the love that God pours into our heart. And that is, as a response to His love, we begin to reciprocate loving God back. We cannot manufacture love in ourselves. It is God who is the very source of love, who is love Himself, should pour forth His love into our hearts so that we can reciprocate it. But then we can do all things not to understand God's love, not to remember, and be constrained by it, whereby we become dry in our Christian life, and then come to a point whether orally or in our heart ask, do you love me? And so to such God's people, whether you might have asked at least once or have thought about this, God says, was not Esau Jacob's brother? Said the Lord, yet I love Jacob. This is the answer God has given to the question that the people of God have asked, saying, was not Esau Jacob's brother? Said the Lord, yet I love Jacob. When we think about this, you and I need to understand God is not talking about the election or the predestination here so much, but He is talking about His sovereignty. If we are to understand this, why does God love Jacob and why does He hate Esau? Verse 3 we read, and I hate Esau. And in our fallen understanding, we get to this quickly saying, hey, see, God also hates. And so, God is not perfect or righteous. This is commonly the misunderstanding that those that have not even come to God would always have. But the fact here is God is talking about His sovereignty, which is what we read in Romans chapter 9 verse 13, when He talks about the same truth as He brings up
in Romans chapter 9 verse 13, we see, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, and Esau have I hated. What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? God forbid. And there we get the answer, Paul trying to bring us to focus on the sovereignty of God more than unrighteousness or more than the understanding about His election. We need to understand the sovereign God, and then in His sovereignty, after we understand that, when we come to Ephesians chapter 1 verse 4, it is His good pleasure because of which we have been predestined or chosen or elected. And so it is sovereign goodness of God because of which we have received this grace to be able to understand God's love, to be able to comprehend God's love, that we might be able to receive the message of the love of God and the cross. There are many in this world who don't have this grace, who have not heard the love of God and the gospel message. And yet, you and I, if we have heard the gospel message, if we have taken it light, it is quite possible that you and I have grown, hardening our hearts to the very gospel message that we have received. That's why we read in Romans chapter 2 verse 4, it says that, are you despising, or despiseth thou the riches of His goodness and forbearance and long suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance? As often as we hear the gospel message and we take it casual, not responding to it, you and I are piling up a hardening heart and a wrath of God for our own lives. And may that be not so of anyone here, that we would take the love of God demonstrated on the cross, communicated through the word of God, lightly, and harden our hearts and be casual and callous to the truth of God's word. And so moving fast, here we see that God then begins to talk about the destruction that He's about to bring in Esau's life. We have pondered on this in the last sermon series that we have looked at. How many of us remember? What is it that we have looked at in the same context? Malachi chapter 1 verses 3, 4 talks about the destruction that was to come upon Edom. And that was part of our True Worship series, right? In Obadiah, we learned that as I know none of us might probably quickly be able to recollect all that I spoke about Obadiah, but we know at least in a nutshell how if we are to come to becoming true worshippers, we need to move away from self-centeredness, which is what Esau is all focused upon. Esau is focused upon himself. He wants to him at the time and the way that he wants and right away he wants. That is self-centeredness. Esau was after what is that curry, by the way? I'm not able to get that in English. The lentil curry or the beans curry. It was red and colorful, tasty. And he wanted it now. He wanted it now and not any later. If I die, why would I have my birthright? And so he gives up his spiritual desires and goes after the self. And so that's why we see Esau is an emblem of self-centeredness. And so to become a true worshipper, in the Obadiah series we saw that we need to move away from self-centeredness to Christ-centeredness. And that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. We come to the cross, give up ourselves, lay down ourselves, and die to ourselves and receive the forgiveness of sins and receive Christ-centered lives. And then we saw that we have to move away from self-glorification to God glorification. Yes, after having come to Christ, there are things that we do for Christ for the glory of ourselves. We want to preach well, we want to sing well, we want to do well in the ministry too, sometimes, often for our own self-glory rather than the glory of God. And for being a true worshipper, we need to move away from self-centeredness. We need to move away from self-glorification to Christ-centeredness and Christ or God's glory, seeking for God's glory with the right motive. And that is what we saw, which is why God brought destruction upon Edom. And here we see, notice how the self comes back again and again. As Edom was destroyed by God, Edom says that I will build it back. God destroys it, and the self again tries to come back and says, oh, which God destroyed it, let me build it back. But God says, I will again destroy it. And that's why we see in verses 3 and 4, God talking about Edom and how He's going to make it a desolate place and destroy it because of the wickedness and the indignation that He had forever on that people which continue to seek after self. And that's why we see in the destruction of wickedness, God is going to be glorified too. He's going to be glorified as a righteous God, as a just God who destroys sin and wickedness justly. He's not a God who would see wickedness and have pity upon it just that they would continue in their wickedness. Which is why we read in Psalm 7 verse 14, we read that God is angry with the wicked every day. And today, when we take note of the wrath of God that is upon those that love wickedness, it is not that the people are hated by God, it is the wickedness that is hated. And so He brings His wrath upon the justice, the destruction upon wickedness. So the first question that we see as the background here is, God wants us to come back to Him, particularly on taking note of His love afresh, and of His sovereign goodness that He has shown it to you and me, in choosing you and me, rather than letting us to be destroyed in our own wickedness. It pleased God that you be found favorable to receive this great gospel and receive this forgiveness. It is nothing in you and me, or no works of you and me. Even in Romans chapter 9 we see, even before they were in their mother's womb, even before they have done one single thing, Jacob have I loved, Esau I have hated. So when you and I think about the sovereign goodness of God in electing, choosing, in giving His grace to be found by God and His grace, to be receiving this gospel message, you and I are to be taking note of this love of God afresh again and again, moment by moment, all through the days of our lives. And so we were enjoying the time of worship as we were giving God, rejoicing in the salvation that He has bestowed upon us. And so moving forward, for the lack of time, I'll just give the two questions that we have in the first chapter and then touch briefly upon the answer to the question 3. So there we see the first question in the slide. In second question is found in verse 6. Let's read that quickly. A son honoreth his father, and a servant his master. If then I be a father, where is my honor? And if I be a master, where is my fear? Saith the Lord of hosts unto you. O priests, that despise my name, and ye say, wherein have we despised thy name? This is the second question. Wherein have we despised thy name? Quite often we can easily ask this. You know, Lord, I have been singing songs for you. I've been worshipping you. I partake in the services regularly. And I'm always there in your ministry. I preach gospel. I do this, I do that. Wherein have I despised your name? This is a question that we easily can be asking when we look into our own lives. But we'll park this question for the next Sunday as we look at the answer that God gives for this in chapter 2. So I would encourage you to read chapter 2 if you can by coming on next Sunday. But let's go to to the third question that is asked in the question immediately following verse 7. By the way, question 2 and 3 are combined actually. They are very related, but they are separate questions. So let's read verse 7 to take note of question 3. Ye offer polluted bread upon mine altar, and ye say, wherein have we polluted thee? And in that ye say, the table of the Lord is contemptible. Here we see the third question. Wherein have we polluted thee? Wherein have we despised thy name? Wherein have we polluted thee? If question 2 talks about the actions and the approach that they have towards the name of God, question 3 talks about the attitude that they have when they come to worshiping God, and when they come to worship God at the altar. So we'll look at the question 2 next week, but question 3, I have 2 assignments for you for next Sunday. The first assignment is to read chapter 2, which is a simple one. The second assignment is we have 4 more questions apart from these 3 questions that I have brought up here. And I want you to, if you can, find those questions in the rest of the chapters. And I said it always follows as a question that the people of God have asked. Wherein have we? And of course there are many questions. That's why it's an assignment for you to figure out those 7 questions. And so that actually helped me to really keep this book of Malachi in perspective, in easy summary format, as a 7 question and answer message that we see in this book. Quickly, let's go to chapter 1, verses 8 onwards till verse 14. I'm not going to be able to cover all that is said here, but I will just touch on what God is trying to speak to God's people, particularly about the attitude that they have. You know, when we look at Cain and Abel's life, as they brought forth offering onto the altar of God, we see it is not so much about the offering. My Sunday school students, initially as I began my ministry in Sunday school, they asked this question, very interestingly, taking note of that particular offering. They asked, is God a non-vegetarian? And the reason they asked is because God accepted the sacrifice of a lamb that Abel gave, and he rejected the offering that Cain gave, which is a vegetarian food. That was a very interesting observation, but it is not about the offering per se. It is about the attitude that they have and the way they came, whether they came by faith, taking note of God and His word at face value as to what God desires, what is acceptable to God, rather than what they brought in a physical sense. So when we see this, it is about the attitude of how you and I come before God in worship. That matters so much. And yes, certainly the actions and the approach also matters, which is what we will look at in the 2nd chapter coming Sunday. But here, when we look at the attitude, verse 8, and if ye offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if ye offer the lame or sick, is it not evil? Offer it unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person? Saith the Lord of hosts. Just try taking whatever you're trying to bring to the house of God, to the president of this country. We are coming to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. We are coming to the King and the ruler of the whole universe. We need to come with a reverential attitude. We cannot come casually. Yes, He is our Heavenly Father. He has brought us into an intimate relationship. Yes, that's true. But that's why we cannot ignore who He really is. That's why we read in verse 6, a son honoreth his father, and a servant his master. If then I be the father, where is my honor? He asks. And so, I want to just give one aspect of the attitude and then close this Sunday. Here, we see the aspect of attitude is how much we honor from the depth of our being and of our heart the name of God. We see God is so much particular about His name and about His honor because He alone deserves it. None other in this world none other in the creation deserves the honor that belongs to Him alone. And so He rightly is concerned about the glory and the name that is due unto His name. Because if it is given to somebody else or something else, it is not worthy. And that's why we read, when we as God's people come to God's house and His altar to offer a sacrifice of praise, offer honor and give our worship and honor, we need to take note of our attitude, which is why we see, because when it depends so much upon our attitude as to how God's name is going to be glorified among all the nations, where we see here particularly The people of God have brought whatever they can to the house of God. The children of Israel, they just brought a lame one or a sick one to be brought as a sacrifice on the altar. But it is not to be done so, because the way the people of God honored the name of God, honored God, it matters more for those that are heathen. And that's why we read in verse 11, from the rising of the sun even unto the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles. And in every place incense shall be offered unto my name, and a pure offering for my name shall be great among the heathen, saith the Lord of hosts. This is what he expects. A pure offering. Nothing that is lame, that is sick, is acceptable to him. A pure offering that comes from a broken and a contrite heart. An offering that comes with the right attitude. An offering that comes by faith, not by works, not by our greatness or our spirituality, but by the sacrifice that he did on the cross in his Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, in his name, in reverencing all that he did on our behalf. It is that is what is acceptable unto him. When we say about his name, we read in verse 14, but cursed be the deceiver who hath in his flock a male and voweth and sacrifices unto the Lord a corrupt thing. For I am a great king, saith the Lord of hosts, and my name is dreadful among the heathen. Just take note of the dreadfulness of the name of God. It is mighty and awesome. There is nothing that can, when we take a look at the people of God, the children of Israel, especially those that wrote the Bible, their sins, those that copied the Bible, for pronouncing this name, Yahweh, YHWH, they dipped themselves or cleansed themselves 7 times. And then after that also, when they copied that, the name of God, they cleansed themselves. So pure is his name. And yet we can so easily take it for granted. And here we see it is so dreadful. Now when I see all this, I am reminded of Isaiah 52 verse 5, where God charges God's people to say, it is because of you my name is continually blasphemed among the heathen. And there Isaiah calls the people of God in verse 52 verse 1, he says, awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion, put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city, for henceforth there shall no more come into thee the uncircumcised and unclean. It is vitally important that we as God's people come in the beauty of holiness to worship our God in an attitude, in a way that is acceptable unto him, in a way that is due, honorable unto him. And in our lives, when we regard the name of God lightly, either in our workplace, it's not just about here. It is so much about where the places that we live, the places that we work, as to how much we regard the name of God. Whether we live a life so callous about the name of God that is upon our lives. And so we have to be mindful of all those things in the way that we are living, in the way that we honor our God. It speaks about his glory to those that are to hear the greatness of God, that is the heathen and the Gentiles. That's what the Lord is giving as part of the charge to the people of God, saying honor in an attitude, in an acceptable attitude. Come with fear and trembling, and yet rejoicing, because this great God had revealed himself and has brought you and me to an intimate place in his Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. And so we'll look forward in chapter 2 and 3, a lot more things, because we just began today in this book of Malachi, the great charge, the solemn charge that God is giving to God's people. And today, when we take note of this great God and this message that this book gives us, these questions that are commonly true in our own lives, may we regard carefully and then receive it, and then let the Lord make us to return unto him, and so he would mold us to the kind of messengers that he would want us to become. Let's pray and close.
and ask the Lord for His grace upon the word that He has spoken to us. పరిశుద్ధుడైన మా ప్రియ పరలోకపు తండ్రి, ఈ యొక్క అపారమైన ప్రేమను బట్టి మా జీవితాల్లో అయినా నీ యొక్క సత్య సువార్తను విని నీ ప్రజలుగా, నీ రక్తంచే కొనబడి నీ జనులుగా మమ్మల్ని చేసిన నీ ప్రేమకై నీకు వందనాలు, స్తోత్రాలు చెల్లిస్తున్నాం. తండ్రి, మీ నామము పరిశుద్ధమైనది, పూజింపదగినది, ఘనత, మహిమ, ప్రభావములు అర్హత కలిగినది. ప్రభా, మరి మా జీవితాల్లో ఈ నామమును మా ప్రభా అపవిత్ర పరచువారుగా, మరి అయినా మా ప్రభా తక్కువగా కించపరిచే వారిగా మా జీవితాలు, మా మాటలు, మా ప్రవర్తన, మా స్వభావాలు మరి ఏది ఉండకుండా అయినా మరి మీ నామను ఘనపరిచేవిగా, అన్యులలో నీ నామము మహిమపరచబడే రీతిగా మా జీవితాలు ఉన్నటకై ఆ రీతిగా మరి మా ప్రభా మా జీవితాలు మలచబడి నీకు దూతలుగా మా జీవితాలు, మా బ్రతుకులు ఉండగలుగుటకు మీ కృపా సహాయం అని విన వాక్యం మా జీవితాల్లో ఫలింప చేయమని యేసయ్య పరిశుద్ధ నామములో ప్రార్థించి వేడుకుంటున్నాను తండ్రి.